Gripping the cold metal rail of the subway car, Evan Turner tried to ignore the stale smell of damp wool and brake pad dust while he scrolled through job listings on his cracked screen. A sudden, muffled sob drifted across the carriage, louder than the rattle of wheels. Evan looked up and saw her, a girl in an oversized gray hoodie, shoulders shaking, tears streaking clean lines through city soot on her cheeks. Her hands fumbled in every pocket, searching for something that clearly wasn't there. In the split second before the train screeched into Park Street Station, her anguished eyes met his, and for a breath Evan felt the raw ache behind them, a silent plea no one else seemed willing to hear. Instinct overruled hesitation. As the doors hissed open he stepped forward, offered his phone, and said, "Hey, it's okay. Call whoever you need." The girl blinked, stunned, then clutched the phone like a lifeline, mouthing a tremulous "thank you" before rushing onto the empty platform. Feeling oddly responsible, Evan followed. She dialed, pacing beneath flickering fluorescent light, but every call, the taxi service, an old dorm friend, even a hotel, ended the same, "I'm sorry, miss, that card's been flagged." Her voice broke on the final rejection. Evan finally asked, "Are you safe? Do you need help?" She hugged herself, whispered, "I can't go back," and sank onto a bench. Her name, she said, was Lila. No last name. No details. Just Lila, alone and terrified in a city that devours the vulnerable. Evan wasn't rich, he barely had rent, but he knew what it felt like to have nowhere to turn. He bought her hot tea from a kiosk, listened as fragments spilled out, a controlling father, a suffocating life behind manicured gates, and a single moment of rebellion, 1 hour ago, when she ran from a limousine outside the Met. Her security detail still hunted her. The phone she'd hidden was gone. Now every credit card connected to her name was frozen. The mansion alarm had sounded, and her freedom shrank to the size of this underground bench. Evan weighed the impossible: shelter a stranger, risk entanglement, or walk away. And then he remembered being 17, sleeping under stadium bleachers after his own father died, and how a high school janitor slipped him bus fare with a single sentence that saved him: "Kindness is circular, send it around." So Evan stood, offered his coat, and said, "Come on. My building's rough but the locks work. You'll be safe enough to plan." Lila's eyes widened at such casual compassion, and in that moment the hopeless gaze he'd first seen shifted, just slightly, toward belief. 2 stops later they reached Evan's neighborhood, where brick tenements leaned like exhausted workers and lamplight trembled in puddles. Up 4 flights they climbed, past graffiti promising better days. Evan's studio was a shoebox, 1 sagging futon, a table he'd rescued from curbside, and a window view of a rusted fire escape. But to Lila it was a sanctuary. As kettle steam curled through peeling paint, she traced a fingertip over the Polaroids taped to his wall: Evan's late mother in a diner uniform, his community college graduation, the neighborhood kids he tutored. They showed a life built on scraps of love rather than privilege, and for the first time Lila admitted her surname, Fairfax, heir to the Fairfax Hotel's empire. Evan almost laughed. She was literally on every billboard between Times Square and Heathrow, but stripped of couture and coiffure she'd become invisible. She explained that her father planned to merge the family business with a ruthless conglomerate, sealed by her arranged engagement to its CEO's heir. Last night, at the gala announcing the strategic alliance, Lila learned the fiancé intended to liquidate staff pensions and turn heritage properties into sterile luxury condos. When she confronted her father, he replied in icy tones that obligation outweighed sentiment. So she fled. Now she feared being dragged back into a gilded cage. Evan, whirling between disbelief and protective anger, offered his futon. At dawn he would reach out to Marisol, the investigative journalist he once tutored, who loved exposing corporate hypocrisy. Maybe sunlight and a front-page threat would force the Fairfax board to treat Lila not as an asset but a human being. They talked until near sunrise, the city's heartbeat slowing outside the dusty window. Somewhere between sharing his secret poetry notebook and her childhood wish to study marine biology, a fragile camaraderie formed, 2 souls from opposite worlds stitched together by empathy. Yet the city never rests. At 6 a.m. heavy fists pounded the door. Evan peeked through the peephole, 2 men in tailored suits, earpieces coiled at their collars. Lila froze. Evan pressed a finger to his lips, grabbed her hand, and guided her toward the fire escape. But the ancient window screeched, footsteps thundered inside. A spine-chilling voice called, Miss Fairfax, your father is worried." Heart racing, Evan climbed into the gray dawn rain, Lila close behind. Down rungs slick with rust they descended into the alley, sprinted through steam vents and morning market crates, adrenaline drowning fatigue. On Canal Street they merged into commuter currents, Lila pulled the hood low, Evan shielded her with his body. They ducked into an all-night laundromat where neon buzzed and dryers groaned. Only then did Lila's trembling return. Evan knelt, holding her shaking hands, and vowed, "We'll get you out. Trust me a little longer." She looked at him, a stranger who'd become her only ally, and whispered, "I do." Over the dryer's rhythmic hum they forged a plan. Marisol would publish at noon. An old seaside hostel in Maine, once Fairfax owned but sold years earlier, could hide Lila until the board's emergency meeting. If Evan could get her there by evening, she'd testify via video, threatening to block the merger. It was a reckless gambit, but hope often is. Clutching a borrowed backpack stuffed with Evan's spare clothes, Lila followed him toward the bus station, unaware that one of the suited men had traced their path on street cameras, his phone already dialing a black SUV idling nearby. The chase, and the choice between chains of inheritance or the uncertain freedom of love, had only begun. If you felt that racing heartbeat in your chest, don't pause now, because Chapter 2 hurtles even faster, and you'll want to stay to the end. Make sure to tap like so more kind hearts find this story, and hit subscribe with notifications on, so you never miss our next journey of fate and compassion. Chapter 2, Running Toward Sunrise. The northbound coach hissed like an awakening dragon as it lumbered out of Port Authority, and Evan exhaled only when skyscrapers surrendered to bridges and then to open highway. Lila sat beside him, hair damp from the drizzle, cheek pressed to the cool window. She clutched a prepaid flip phone Marisol had messengered minutes before departure, a relic immune to Fairfax tracking software. On the seat behind them a stranger in earbuds bobbed to unheard beats, oblivious to the silent war of billion-dollar interests converging on this bus. Evan tried to steady himself, but every headlight in the rearview mirror made his pulse spike. He forced his thoughts toward strategy. Marisol's exposé would break at 12:01 p.m., Fairfax stock would wobble, the board would call an emergency session. If Lila testified on record, public sympathy could upend the arranged engagement and stall the merger. Meanwhile he had to keep her hidden, body and soul intact. Yet even fugitives need laughter. Somewhere past New Haven, Lila asked for a pencil and began sketching sea turtles on the back of Evan's resume. She confessed she'd once named every rescue at the family's Bahamas Resort Rehabilitation Center, until the project was cancelled for not being premium. Evan countered by sharing his worst open mic night, when a poetry slam crowd booed his ode to street lamp loneliness. Each confession peeled back armor neither had known they wore. With every mile, the subway encounter started to resemble a miracle rather than chance. But miracles invite opposition. At 11:45 a.m. the bus pulled into a rest stop. As passengers filed out toward coffee and bathrooms, Evan's phone buzzed. A text from Marisol, story live in 15. But Fairfax legal already threatening injunction. You need her statement on video now. I'll send link in 5. Evan's stomach flipped. They had to record before the bus rolled again. He guided Lila behind the vending machines, angled the flip phone camera, and whispered, "Speak from the heart." With fluorescent hum as their stage lights, Lila inhaled, straightened, and let truth pour forth, about the merger, the pensions, the arranged marriage that would turn employees' futures into yachts. Tears shimmered but she didn't break. "My name is Lila Fairfax," she finished, "and I reclaim my voice." Evan sent the file. Seconds later Marisol replied with a single fire emoji and the headline already updated, "Runaway Heiress exposes corporate coup." They boarded moments before departure. The driver closed the door, just as a black SUV screeched into the lot. Two suited men leapt out, flashing badges that meant nothing outside Manhattan. The driver, contractually bound to schedule, rolled away while horns blared and one agent punched the air. Lila's grip crushed Evan's fingers, but the bus gathered speed onto the interstate. Half an hour later her story topped trending feeds, sympathetic hashtags bloomed. Fairfax PR issued a statement of concern for Lila's well-being, but the comment section flooded with demands for a public board meeting. Victory fluttered near, but the battle wasn't over. The agents would anticipate Maine. Evan studied the GPS on a borrowed tablet. "We can't go straight to the hostel," he said. "They'll stake it out. Lila nodded, resolve sharpened the soft lines of her face. Then we create a decoy. At Portsmouth they disembarked, melted into a festival crowd, and bought 2 second-hand bicycles from a charity booth. Using cash Marisol wired to a convenience store transfer kiosk, they pedaled toward the coast on back roads where salt air mingled with honeysuckle. Freedom smelled briny and sweet. They rode until twilight gilded marshes, then slipped into a shuttered lighthouse keeper's cottage, now a seasonal museum closed midweek. Inside, moonlight pooled across dusty exhibits. Evan found blankets, Lila unearthed a corroded lantern. Wrapped together in sparse warmth, they watched constellations will through broken panes. Evan recited the poem that crowd once booed, and under that celestial amphitheater Lila whispered, "Your words feel like home." He touched her cheek, hesitant, and in that pause before kiss or retreat she leaned forward, dissolving the distance history had drawn between them. The world beyond the cracked shutters, Fortune 500 machinations, tabloids, gilded ceilings, fell away, leaving only the hush of surf and 2 heartbeats sinking. Dawn bled rose over the horizon when flashing red and blue lights stabbed the path below. Someone had tipped off authorities that the lighthouse alarm was tripped. Evan and Lila bolted, bikes left behind. They scrambled down a dune, shoes sinking in cold sand. Behind them boots pounded boards, shouts pierced gull cries. Ahead lay a fisherman's pier and an anchored lobster boat sputtering to life. Evan waved frantically. The captain, a grizzled woman named Ruth, eyed them as if weighing ghost stories. Over Lila's shoulder the first agent crested the dune, radio squawking. Evan shouted, "She's Fairfax, the exposé, help us finish this." Something in his voice, urgency. Naked hope. Made Ruth gesture them aboard. As the boat chugged into open water, officers reached the pier too late, their curses drowned by engine roar. Ruth piloted northeast, braids whipping, while Lila and Evan crouched among lobster traps. Evan explained the board session rescheduled for 10 a.m., they had 2 hours to reach a harbor with reliable signal. Ruth grunted. "Signal spotty till Camden, but currents with us." Spray lashed their faces, but adrenaline warmed them. They arrived at Camden a minute before 10. Borrowing Ruth's dog-eared laptop and a dockside Wi-Fi extender, Lila connected to the live-stream board meeting. Directors, flanked by lawyers, looked rattled. Lila spoke, "I am safe by my own will. If any retaliation falls on staff or on Evan Turner, I will testify in open court about every malpractice I witnessed." Lawyers muted, directors whispered, and a unanimous vote suspended both the merger and her father's authority pending independent review. The fiancé's face. Broadcast from Zurich, twisted into petulant rage as shareholders flooded the chat with applause emojis. When the motion passed, Lila muted herself, closed the laptop, and for the first time since the subway breathed without fear. Evan, soaked and shivering, laughed, a raw, surprised sound. Lila joined him until tears blurred into raindrops. Ruth winked, muttering, "Good trouble, kids," before heading below deck. Alone on the pier, Lila turned to Evan. "You gave a stranger your phone," she said. "You gave me my life." Evan brushed wind-tangled hair from her eyes. "And you wrote the ending," he replied. "But maybe it's a beginning." She smiled, a sunrise breaking, and answered with a kiss that tasted of salt, rain, and uncharted horizons. Weeks later, the headlines told of a Fairfax Foundation funding pension restorations and marine research scholarships. Anonymous sources credited a persistent young advisor named Evan Turner. But the story that mattered unfolded far from boardrooms. 2 bicycles retrieved and repainted sea glass green, coastlines explored when tutoring sessions paused, poetry nights where boos turned to ovations because Lila cheered loudest in the front row. Kindness had circled, as promised. And now, dear listener, if this tale of courage and compassion sparked a light in you, help us keep the circle turning. Hit that like button so more hearts find hope, and subscribe for the next story where one small act changes everything. Your support fuels every word we share, so join our journey, and let's chase the sunrise together. The countryside blurred past the window like a watercolor painting. Lila sat beside Evan, her head resting on the windowpane as she tried to make sense of the whirlwind her life had become. Just 48 hours ago, she had been standing beneath chandeliers, wearing a dress worth more than Evan's yearly salary, smiling for cameras she hated. Now she wore his hoodie, her hair tied in a makeshift ponytail, and she felt free. terrified, but free. Evan kept glancing over at her, worried. Not just for her safety, but for how heavy the weight in her chest looked. She hadn't eaten much, barely slept. He reached into his backpack, pulled out a granola bar, and offered it silently. She took it with a tired smile. They arrived in the town of Willow Creek before noon. A sleepy little place with winding roads, cobblestone sidewalks, and old bookstores. It was the kind of place no one would think to look for a billionaire's daughter. They checked into a small inn owned by a retired couple. Evan gave a fake name and paid with what little cash he had left. Their room was upstairs, small and cozy, with a fireplace and creaky floorboards. The innkeepers asked no questions. For the next day, Lila stayed in. She slept, ate, cried, talked. And Evan listened. She told him everything. About her mother's death when she was 12. About how her father changed after that, how he became more empire than man. How he stopped seeing her as his daughter and started seeing her as an asset. She told him about the merger, about the fiancé, about the contracts she'd found hidden in the safe that showed the whole thing was designed to strip the company and leave loyal employees jobless. That was when she decided she couldn't stay. I didn't run because I was scared, she said quietly. I ran because I couldn't let them use me to destroy something my mother built. Evan looked at her with quiet admiration. You're stronger than you think, Lila. The next morning, Marisol, the journalist friend Evan had reached out to, sent a message. Send the story. I'll run it. Full page. Front. Lila hesitated. If I speak, they'll come after me harder. Evan nodded. But if you don't, they'll silence you anyway. That night, they recorded the video. Lila sat in front of the fireplace, eyes clear, voice steady, as she told the world everything, the merger, the lies, the pressure, the control. And how she wasn't running anymore. Marisol posted it the next morning. Within hours, the internet exploded. Hashtag Let Lila Speak trended worldwide. The Fairfax board issued a statement. Shareholders called for an emergency vote. Public pressure mounted. The men she was supposed to marry. Exposed for embezzling funds in his previous company. The merger? Paused indefinitely. Her father. Publicly forced to issue a statement claiming he supported Lila's independence. The whole house of cards fell. And through it all, Evan stood by her side. Not because he had to. But because he chose to. And Lila, who had never trusted anyone, let him in. 2 weeks later, sitting on a park bench under the same gray hoodie she'd worn that first night, Lila looked at Evan and said the words that made his heart stop. I want to go back. Not to the mansion. But to fix what's broken. He nodded. Then I'll go with you. And they did. She took the stage at a press conference, not as a victim, but as a voice. She created the Lila Fairfax Foundation to protect employees from corporate abuse. She hired new advisors. And she brought Evan on board. Not because he was the richest. Not because he was famous. But because he was the one who gave her his phone when no one else would even look at her. The man who changed everything with a single act of kindness. And now. They walk side by side, not as a runaway heiress and a dishwasher, but as partners. In business. In life. And in love. Because sometimes, the smallest moments, like lending your phone to a crying stranger, can lead to a lifetime of everything you never knew you needed. If this story warmed your heart, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you believe kindness can still change the world, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our next emotional journey. We post powerful love stories, heartwarming moments, and unforgettable twists every week. Let's keep the stories alive, together. Hashtag he lent his phone. Hashtag runaway heiress story. Hashtag emotional love story. Hashtag subway miracle. Hashtag unexpected love.